I've been focusing an awful lot on the Guild Guitar Company lately, and I've been looking at interviews also here and there with George Gruhn, and I saw this different section of videos. They're conversations with George, and they're hour-long videos. And you can imagine when someone wrote in a question to him saying, "What are your thoughts on Guild? Do you think there's a best production factory for Guild? And what do you think the best era for Guild was?" And once I heard that, my ears perked up because this is exactly what I've been researching lately about the New Jersey guilds versus the Rhode Island guilds, the New Jersey ones being lighter weight and supposed to be from more magical ones from the 60s versus the 70s guilds where things got very heavy, perhaps even overbuilt, because I've spoken about how in the 70s things didn't fare well for guitar builders in general, and in the 60s the guilds were very lightweight by comparison, and they're also more few and far between. So when I saw this video on George Gruhn talking about it, I thought I would share some insight on this little tidbit of how he answered this question, because this is exactly what I was looking into recently, researching deeply about a certain kind of guild and then guilds in general. I've even been messaging a guy back and forth on Reverb who's dedicated strictly to guilds. And there was one I was looking at. The one available does not have the scale length that I wanted. It doesn't have the nut width that I wanted. And it doesn't have the exact condition that I wanted, that I would want in the 60s. But I'm very interested in the 60s New Jersey guilds. Now, what the guy wrote in to ask George was, what do you think the best production era for Guild was? Do you think there was a bad one, a bad era? And what do you think about Guild in general? Basically, when they're going from New York to New Jersey, Rhode Island, etc., all the different moves that happen with the company and even mishaps that might have happened with the company. Do you think there was a standout era when the Guild guitars were the best? Do you think there was a time when they were the worst? And what does he think about Guild? And then he answered it. And what he said was, he talked about how the company has a long history, first of all. He talked about how the company started out in New York basically with ex-Epiphone workers that were out of a job, and they began working that way. And then he talks about how when they went to New Jersey, he didn't say anything about the New Jersey guitars in and of themselves, which, if you begin researching, they're regarded as the best, I gotta say. They're regarded as the lightest built, the best sounding, the hardest to find, the most collectible. And I know George has went on record saying 70s stuff just isn't collectible anyway, and just because something's vintage doesn't make it collectible, or just because something's old doesn't make it vintage. So he quickly glossed over the way they moved from New Jersey to Rhode Island and how they made several moves after that and then eventually went bankrupt and were bought out by Fender and so forth. But he didn't say anything about the New Jersey guitars in particular, or the Rhode Island ones, being heavier or anything. What he said after that was, I don't believe there is a real golden era of Guild. And he said they just, throughout the entire time they were making guitars for the most part, They just made very good guitars, but they never quite could outdo Martin or Gibson. That's what he said. So he said they made good instruments, but they weren't able to outclass Martin or Gibson. And from what my research is, that certain guilds, if you really research, can be a much better value than a Martin or Gibson because of the way they're priced. They're priced in such a way that if you can find one in the 60s too, that the value in a vintage flat top right there is huge. And if you were to get a vintage Martin 000 from the 60s, it would be a lot more when the guild is as good or better sounding. So George didn't say that. He clearly knows the history, obviously. Super knowledgeable guy. But he didn't say anything specific in regards to that. The 60s ones are supposed to be different animals, and they say they have a headstock where there's some kind of shrinkage to the plastic around the headstock. That's the main complaint to them. And the 70s ones are said to just be overbuilt and built like tanks, like this one. And it is built like a tank, but I saw something interesting too. You have to garner different perspectives, and I was watching Mark Agnesi play a guild. The two videos that are out there, he's playing the guild. And they're both 70s, the Norman's rare guitars. And what he says is basically, he didn't say it as a negative. He just picked it up and said, these old guilds, you can feel the construction of them. They're built like tanks. He said it's a cannon. It was the guild equivalent to a SJ200. And he was saying, these are built like tanks. The old Martins and the old Gibsons, they want to fly out of your hand. Not the guilds. You can feel the construction. So he didn't say it like a negative thing. And I like Mark Agnesi. He knows his stuff, and he's a fantastic player too. So it's interesting to get those different perspectives. But Mark Agnesi also did say that the guild, that the 60s guilds don't really turn up that often. And he also said that guilds in general are kind of undervalued and they don't turn up that often. But those that know about them tend to really, they have like a real cult following in that way, and they're just a big competitor that has always existed. But according to George Gruhn, they never competed in a big way with either Fender for the electrics or Gibson or Martin. And I think they did compete with Gibson and Martin when it comes to the price on acoustic flat tops, and now they're really competing with vintage acoustic flat tops. Then and now. So let me know your thoughts. I've got my eyes out for a 1960s New Jersey, if it's the right model and it has the right scale length that I want, and the right nut width that I want, and the condition that I want. I may consider somehow working out another trade of some sort. But I just wanted to share that video, particularly on George Gruhn's thoughts on it, because I've just really started getting into him, and I like his videos. I like his the store. I like listening to him. Some of his opinions on when he starts getting into other subjects other than instruments. I wish he would stick with the instruments sometimes. But I've been following him, and when he popped up in the middle of the video speaking about just the thing I've been researching for days now, I figured I had to share that because it's not a direct video you can search for. It's kind of hidden in his 1 hour videos in the middle of it. And he spoke about exactly what I was researching. He didn't go into it in as much detail as I would have liked, though, because the people that out there that have experience with these New Jersey guilds speak about how they were lighter, much lighter weight, and some think that those are the absolute best from guild. And I spoke in a previous video about why things got heavier in the 70s, and people are theorizing because instruments were being sent back for repairs and so forth. So they made the instruments very sturdy. And it feel like Mark Agnesi said, you do feel the construction of it. But what kind of impact does it have on the sound? Or even the playability? So you don't really know until you have it in your hands and you begin comparing. But that's what he said in the little question, the little tiny section of that video. He gave a whole quick, succinct breakdown of the company's history, and then said that there really was no standout era for Guild, but they made great instruments during all that time pretty much, except they never were able to really beat out Martin or Fender or Gibson. But I believe when it comes to the world of acoustic flat tops, that for value, they do beat out Martin and Gibson in a lot of ways. Gibson just raised the prices for those. I was looking up what the LOO original is worth that I own. And they're worth more money now than they were before, those new models. The original. The originals are worth more now than when I got mine, which is crazy. So that might be one to hold on to. Out of the factory, it needs the bridge re-glued. But the LOO is a classic. So, I don't know. All I know is this guitar stuff gets absolutely crazy. But I've become very interested in this brand known as Guild. So let me know your thoughts on this subject down below. Who knows, one of these days you might see me with a New Jersey Guild, and we'll see if it's just as magical as they say. I know the model I'm looking at would be the finger picking guitar. Real finger picker. That's what I would want. Not to say I don't have instruments that do that well already. So, the guitar sickness never ends. I don't know what I'm going to do. Just thought I'd share my thoughts on it with you guys. Those 60s ones don't turn up often, but this one here is remarkable shape. Amazing condition on this one. It's hard to say. Thanks though.